I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, and his name is Cole Caswell, and he uses photography to explore the remnants and patterns in the landscape that reflect contemporary strategies of survival, which sounds amazing, and his work is amazing. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it right over to Cole.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, and thank you for having me and for everyone coming to listen to me chat about my work. Um, I work primarily with wet plate collodion, though I do a lot of cyanotyping and other sorts of hands-on versions of photography. And my studio is based here on Peaks Island up in Maine, just off the coast of Portland. Um, and I like to I travel, like there were numerous years, about 10, where I was traveling the majority of the year in a camper van, sort of taking the wet plate collodion process like all over the country and considering what was happening with the landscape. Um, so tonight I have like 2.5 projects to share with you guys, sort of the most contemporary work that I'm making. Um, and I'll load those screens right now. So we'll do a screen share.
Well, I was going to jump in. We mentioned that if anybody has questions while Cole's presenting that's specific to an image that's up or something like that, you could pop it into the chat and I'll relay it to him. Or if you have more general questions, you could just wait till the Q&A at the end. Just wanted to let everybody know that.
Great, yeah, and I'm totally happy for the questions whenever, or at the end is fine too. So this first project I'm going to share is I've been working on it for about 3 years now. It's I've titled it Rise, and it uses a combination of like projected sea level rise estimates through like GIS and just my knowledge of the Maine coast. I was a sea kayak guide at one point, and I've lived here for over 10 years. And so I sort of like know what's happening in the area around me on the seacoast. And I've used those local knowledge and projections of like what might happen in the future of the landscape to sort of identify places like lowlands or places where the landscape might be lost to the increasing of the water on the coast of Maine and New England. Um, and so basically I take my wet plate collodion setup, which includes a portable darkroom and a large format camera. Um, most of these were made off of the back of a vehicle, accessing the coast, through walking, and just like finding random ditches and like drainage areas where I could access the marsh. I also live out on Peaks Island, so I can code a plate here at my darkroom, and then I can drive anywhere on the island without taking the darkroom with me. So that allows me to work in a variety of like different weather conditions. Um, and I'm really interested in this project both as a way of understanding these places that could be lost to or changed due to sea level rise, but also just as a way to like consider like what makes up a place and what is like surrounding a place. And also like the process of like daydreaming about those things. And I love those ideas and how they sort of intermix with the chemistry of the wet plate collodion process. Each plate's hand coded on location. And oftentimes I'm capitalizing on the environment, whether it's like dust or heavy fog or lots of mist or junk in my chemistry that I've purposely left there, which you can see in this one. There's a giant glob right in the center, um, kind of creating this like comet or mark. And I'm very much interested in these marks that, as we think about wet plate collodion plates and you start to talk about them technically, we often like refer to them as comets or something along these lines of scaling these like marks. And I just like how they combine with these ideas about the landscape and its potential change. Um, and you can sort of see this in this lineup right here. I have this image that's made from Peaks Island, looking at the sea level, looking at the coast. And then this is the actual image of what I was working with from my iPhone that day. And there's just like a more haunted feel. I love the mark on the left of the page that sort of like erases the horizon and almost looks like fire to some extent. Um, And here's my setup. This is the dark rooms on the back of the van there, wrapped in that sort of tarp. It hasn't opened up yet. But I'm often working in an environment like this. It's normally misty, the conditions are cramped, and I sort of like it that way. When I first started getting into wet plate collodion, I wanted to do it outside because I didn't want like limit my exposure to the chemicals. And I also just there's something about like taking the time that it takes to make those pictures and spending that time in a place to just consider what it's like to be there that I think is really informative into the process and the pictures. And it's like part of my practice that I enjoy quite a bit. Um, so this is made here on Peaks Island, looking sort of like across at the neighboring Diamond Pass. And like I got a bunch of crazy like chemical action that happened in this one and some cool like star dust thing. And there's even like some weird marks that look like writing. And I really like this one because it's like Diamond Pass is the geographical space, but the sky also feels like something's happening in that way. Um, and so I've just been sort of exploring like how to access these places with all of this gear. The coast is pretty dynamic. The tide here in Maine is around 10 feet. So getting to these places, sometimes they look really great at low tide, but the light's not right. And like you have to walk through the mud. And all of that has been like really great. It's like part of the adventure and part of what I like about being outdoors. And like also what I like about the wet plate collodion process, again, it slows you down and you have to consider, you know, not just like where are you going to stand and what lens you're holding, but like what time of day, what the tide is doing, like what my chemistry is doing. I have to lug things through the world, and I get to like look at the ground, think about the snails and the seaweed, and so just like spend more time like understanding or just considering my experience in a place, which is these sort of edges of the coast of Maine that are going to change as our climate warms and more water is sloshing around up here in Casco Bay. Um, so when I first started the project, I was working a lot on the marshes, sort of around Portland. It was the easiest to access, and I would go out there in early spring when there was a lot of fog, because I thought that I felt like the fog in the sky sort of helped to mask the landscaping, create an atmospheric mood that made them feel out of time or out of place. Um, because part of what I like, they're per their daydreams of like what the future could be is sort of how I understand them in my own mind. And that's something that maybe doesn't make the most amount of sense because I'm using like a historic process that sort of often makes us think about, you know, the 19th century and understanding the Western landscape through these pictures that were made with the wet plate collodion process. But there's something about the like combining of these marks I was talking about at the beginning, the comets or the wiping or the scratching, and then also the marks that I'm not really sure where they come from, these weird streaks and things that just occur, sort of halos along the horizon that I feel like are starting to gain, they're a language in themselves that I'm trying to understand and apply to the topic or the subject that I'm interested in, because I feel like um you know our climate is at risk, and things are happening that we can't quite see right now, but in the future there's potentially going to be like visual ramifications. And I think that the chemistry sort of helps to show that, or it's what I'm seeing as I am responding to them. And a lot of times it has to do with what's happening in the sky. You know, it's the collodion lends us to this like thick, drippy, milky sort of highlight. So the skies are always compromised or enigmatically moody. And I really like that about the process. I can control it to a certain extent, but I also like every time is sort of, it's an experiment and a guess at what will be revealed from me spending time in that place and messing around with my chemistry. A nice example of sort of like the chance-based aspects are the little dots in the sky on this piece here are from excess moisture in the atmosphere. It was super foggy and really misty, and so condensation was forming on the plate as I was pouring it, causing a chemical imperfection to happen, which sort of reads as these like comets or tears or streaks in the sky. This was from a residency last summer down at Surf Point, which is a residency here in Maine. That's right on the coast of Maine. So I was really lucky to spend the month of July a year ago, just making plates right off the backyard. And one of the things that sort of is a recurring theme, oh, sorry, here's a picture of me sort of navigating the island landscape and this like marshy, sandy stuff. I've worked out of kayaks and canoes and the van, and then just like also drag stuff around. Yeah, so up at Surf Point, and the reoccurring sort of theme that keeps popping up in the work that's almost bookends this project is this the presence of the sun itself within the images. And I read it sort of as like a grounding point. It's like it's like reference to the larger scale of the project, or the effects of the sun and what it will have on the environment too. And I also feel like the third part about it is that it makes the chemistry act really weird, so it can be a tool that I can use to like make crazy stuff happen in the sky, or to enliven the photograph with this like eerie sort of floating orb. Because in the end, you know, I'm putting myself in a location that has like all of these like potential meanings given what's happening in our world, but I'm just like making pictures and responding to the place once I'm there. I'm trying to like do like a scientific approach, but then just like use the wet plate colloidium process to respond to what's happening in the location around me, whether that's like the birds or the flowers or the fog. And just like letting those things combine on the plate, because it's such a hands-on process. You know, the scratches and scrapes and all of the milky sort of like haze that can be part of it is something that I can deploy to like create mood within the works. And so we're coming to the last few images in this series. Again, you can see it here with the like striations in the sky. It's from excess moisture. And again, like part of what I like about the wet plate process is that it's super flexible. And it's every plate can be an experiment. Like I can change one thing because I'm interested in the visual sort of effects within the image, not necessarily like chemically what's happening. And I really love the like opportunity to just like apply chance and like let things happen with the chemistry that I didn't necessarily approve of or have any plans for. This image in particular was originally a tintype, and it was stacked leaning in my studio, and the plate in front of it had excess chemistry. I don't even know what. The back of the tintype that was leaning on it had something on it that caused that stain in the sky to occur. And I had 3 copies of this boat picture, so I then continued to stack the other 2 copies of the tintype onto the plate that had the staining on it to create the effect on the 3 plates I had. So I'm like playing with the process, and I like that opportunity for chance and aberration to sort of occur. And this is the last picture I have from that series. Again, another image from Surf Point, where like there was just enough like atmosphere and fog for the sun to create this like really beautiful halo. And the other thing about the process, which is a good like lead into the last series I have to share with you, is that it's extra sensitive to the sky. So you have to sort of figure out ways to handle the landscape, but you can also like, there's a ton of density in the negative when you like take a picture of the sky, So you can really pull out like a huge tonal range from like that part of the picture, which is where like when I digitally print these, I can make those separations happen. I'm not sure what would happen if I were to make these prints in the darkroom, especially like this one. And some of the other works that are coming up are made on tin types. And it's just the glass plate negative really allows for a really nice tonal range in the sky at the end of the process in the computer. So to transition off of this project, I was sort of interested, again, the Rise project, I was interested in excess water and how it was going to affect the Maine coast. And this past winter, I was traveling and I had the opportunity to spend like 2 weeks around the Lake Mead area. And I'm just sort of applying the same ideas and principles I was using to make the pictures on the coast of Maine to that landscape where water was becoming less present. I thought would be an interesting contrast and way to just like see how the process and my ideas and the way I was using the process would interact with a landscape that was also very vast, like the ocean, but in a very different way. And it was a really great uh, time and experience sort of wandering around in the desert. Here I am getting set up to work out of our van. Like I would be underwater in Lake Mead right here working, which I thought was really cool. The dogs were picking up like trees that were like sticks and stuff that were probably growing when the lake flooded. And it was kind of neat to think that they were like so old and had spent all that time underwater. And just like again, like figure out like what's happening in the landscape through observation and like what's happening on a small scale and then like also what's happening on a large scale. Here we have a picture of like my camera box and my chemical box and the holding tanks where I would hold the plates as I was traveling. At points I would wash them in the water where I was, but at other points I would try to carry clean water. Um, you can get all sorts of effects depending on how poorly you treat the plates after you make them, which often, it's like I don't intentionally treat them poorly, but often the conditions of my situation don't offer like a better situation. And so marks and the staining and bits and things happen to them, which I feel is part of that's like why I like the process. I feel like it's part of this embedding of the experience of being somewhere like into the actual image and the physical object itself. Especially with the last series that I'm going to show you, which is I just was working on this spring and I've been spending the summer figuring out how to put into the world as objects, which is a series of tin types focusing on the sun. And this series is I don't really have a full name for it yet, but I've done these grids where I again set up the parameters around the photograph, like using some sort of system to set me off on a course or a direction. And so some of the parameters behind this project are to like use the tin type, constantly put the sun within the center of the frame, um, just wander and consider place and what it's like to be somewhere, what it's like to think about and stare at the sun, like what it's like to look at something or photograph something that you can't really see with your naked eye, and just really experiment and like capitalize on all of the aspects of the process that um, can create these wonderful marks, like what's happening on the right hand edge of this image or the smokiness that's in the trees on the bottom. Um, and so this spring, I spent a month just wandering around a pretty small area in North Carolina up on the mountains. And mostly I spent time there because it was rural, like no one else was there. I could totally set up on the side of the road. This was this great helicopter pad that was abandoned along the Appalachian Trail. And it was hot. It was really great to like leave Maine and go down there where it was super warm and the snakes weren't quite out, but it was sunny. And I was making all these pictures of the sun, and you sort of figured out ways again to work with like being in the remote backcountry to a certain extent. drying plates in the sun on rocks, washing them in the river, working out of the van to sort of carry or bring these like semi-precious objects back to the studio. It's one thing I like about the glass plate negatives, which is the projects we were looking at before, is that the negative itself can be interpreted into the computer and I can like fix a scratch if I really hate it. But the tin types are going to be final objects in the world. And so I am super like protective of their surface as best as I can in the environment because it's just so dusty and often wet. And then we are driving thousands of miles and that's adding like lots of vibrations. So the tin types offer like, though the glass could potentially crack and break, the tin types are a whole separate like set of attention because they are going to be these one of a kind objects that live in the world that were created maybe when it's raining or maybe when it's super sunny and then like maybe washed in a creek where there's like sediment or like it rains and like a creek gets all gravelly. All these conditions of the environment are part of what's making the images themselves, are part of what's adding to the artifacts within the images. And then I'm also purposefully like using the wet plate collodion process like a chemogram, or not really like a photogram, but I'm purposely doing things wrong to make marks. That one's a great example because you can like all this drippiness that's coming up from the bottom is like improperly placing the plate into the silver tank. But doing so in a way as to like suggest like a landscape or these like rolling hills that I was witnessing as I was considering the landscape in North Carolina, like along the Appalachian Trail. And then also just like really playing with this like star pattern that is the sun, and then the like what it does to my lens when I get it like just lined up right, and all of these like seven-sided shapes start like floating in the picture. And I really like them. I like the shapes because they're super sharp in comparison to the sky. It's another like reference point. And I also feel like it's like part of what the camera is seeing that we don't see with our naked eye. So it's like another one of these aspects of like seeing what you can't see with your eye through the camera and the process itself. And they sort of make it, I don't know, they add this like geometric or fractal sort of like heavenly effect that I also like to deploy. And I feel like it sort of does something against the swirling sky that is the collodion and the background. And there's a lot of like, I don't know what's happening in a lot of these plates that make the marks. Which is what sort of intrigues me about them, because sometimes I think the sun might dry out the colloidian in the dead center, which is like what's leaving the mark itself, but other times it wasn't that bright and it's still it's all a question and up for interpretation, because it's just about sort of considering what it's like to like look through the landscape at the atmosphere, which is also through the process of wet plate collodion. And I didn't start like, this series is very much geographically specific around the Asheville area because it's going to be like arranged into a grid. I have 85 of these that I'm hoping to edit down to about 50 so that I can install them in a like, I think it's going to be a 3 or 4 like tall like line that sort of like moves through the gallery space. So I'm working to sort of figure out how to get them on the wall right now, and like the sequence and which ones are going to be pulled out. And I like that all of them together, you start, that's where the like the hexagons and things start to suggest movement within the larger grid itself, but then each image is very delicate and there's like a lot of information sort of packed into the sky or the reference points to like where you might be. So here's another picture of me working. The dark room's there on the left, that folded down wooden box, and I'm like drawing 2 or 3 glass plates negatives right there on the ground. I was getting to the point in my process where I was washing and drying everything before I would move from a location, because I was getting a lot of like the colloidin was washing away, or I was trying to really keep the tintypes again like in the most pristine condition possible, because they are like the final objects in the end. And here you can see this is like part of my living quarters, and like some of the tintypes and glass plate negatives drying, and like the storage box on the right, with some labeling about which direction, so that I can try to prevent scratching. And I put in, there was 30 or so of these images for this project, and we're coming to the end of them now. And I've done this project source in a variety of different locations. I did one in the Everglades. I did one in New Mexico up by the Rio Grande Gorge. And I did one, the original one was 81 tintypes that were sort of sampled from all over the country as I was traveling, arranged in a huge 9x9 grid, which was pretty fun because of the scale of it. It was like 8 feet, 9 feet tall, and a couple feet, 4 or 5 feet wide. So you could like walk up to it and sort of engage with the whole piece itself, but also like zoom into the smaller aspects again of what it's like to just like sit someplace and like enjoy your time there, and like, I don't know, daydreaming about what you wish you could see but you can't, or something along those lines. um we're getting close to the end here. If this is not the last one, there's only a couple more. um so yeah, I'm really excited to see how these come together and see how they work on the wall. um and thanks for coming to see what I've been working on most recently. And here's sort of a rough mock-up of the pictures from the grid that we looked at this evening, just so you can sort of see how the flares of the lens itself sort of help to add movement to the grid, which is another sort of part of their like purpose within the project. Great. So that's all the slides I have. Happy to circle back to like pictures I showed, or parts of the process, or just illuminate about, I don't know, how something is done if there are questions. Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Cole. If people have questions, you can type them into the chat, or there's the raise hand function if you want to use that to actually ask the question with your own voice. And then also we will get a transcript of the chat. So if you want to put any messages in there for Cole that aren't necessarily questions, but just comments you want to share, I'll be sharing the transcript of the chat with him as well. So feel free to do that. And I know I'm going to kick it off. I realize that one thing I really like about your wet plate work is the detail in the sky, because I know, because of the sensitivity of the particular part of the spectrum that the process has, some people have a challenge kind of getting detail in the sky. So I'm wondering if you mentioned early on that a lot of the places you were photographing were foggy or hazy. Do you think that has anything to do with it, or are you doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, the haze definitely helps to, it just like cuts down on the amount of contrast in the scene. I honestly feel like it's mostly just about exposure and like how you want the mood of the image to feel. Often like a lot of those pictures, like a lot of the pictures in all of the projects except for the stuff from Lake Mead, were shot like when it was pretty bright out, but they're made to look like it could be even like evening or twilight because of the way I'm like exposing it. And that also helps to bring like the range of the sky like into check, because I don't really like, I'm not looking for detail in the trees.
So are they just longer exposures than would normally
Yeah, quicker
be recommended?
exposures.
Oh, okay.
Quicker exposures, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And like that's like it's like the wet plates process is so fun because you can be like, oh, I started making pictures of the sun like years and years ago in LA when I was at a residency, because it was sort of like posed over breakfast, like what would happen if you just pointed it like directly into the sun, and like cut the exposure way down, like so far down that you started to not like, it didn't matter if there was crap in the way, you just were looking at the sun itself. And that's sort of like little mini questions like that, or just like how I tweak the experiment. I'm like, oh, what would happen if I stick this in front of the lens while I do that, or I do this to my chemistry. And I like the process because I get to see the result like a moment later. I'm looking at the plate and I'm like, oh, that worked or it didn't, and I can kind of gauge it from there.
Cool. Catherine has a question. She's wondering if you can talk a little more about the last slide with capturing the sun. Are you aiming to do abstract images in this case as compared to your earlier ones that you
Just
showed of the outdoor scenes? Yeah.
yeah, I'm looking for a variety. As I'm like sitting on these like hillsides in North Carolina, sort of watching the sun like pass overhead, I'm watching it like spend time like engaging with foliage and trees, but I'm also spending the beginning, like the middle part of the day with it just like blazing overhead. Um, and so I'm like trying to get the range of the experience um in like the grid itself as I'm like working on the project. And I do, like this one I think is pretty close to, I mean, depending on how you interpret the black line at the bottom, whether that's just like me being lazy or if that's like the horizon, um, it's both abstract and suggestive of like a place just like from far away, maybe. Which is what I was like looking at a lot when I was in North Carolina, where these like gradient hillsides sort of that from far away didn't really look like they had anything on them, but when you got there, you were like so far in the trees you couldn't really like see it.
Mhm.
And that's also like, the reason that line's there is because I didn't pull the dark slide out of the film back all the way, and I did it intentionally to like suggest a horizon while it was the middle of the day and I didn't have that situation at hand. I was like trying to create um what I was daydreaming about with what was around me at the moment, which was like the sun straight overhead.
Um, so Catherine is thanking you. Your
Mm.
images are really captivating. And I think, yeah, you're talking about the mood and sort of recreating your daydreams on your plates. So I think that kind of speaks to that abstract versus realistic and kind of finding that middle ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
think the like realistic is the like set of parameters that got me there, and then the like rest of it's kind of just a daydream. So like the putting of the sun in the center and like the chemist like figuring out the chemistry to get the reveal is the parameters, and then like everything else is just play.
um, Cole Phillips has a question with a raised hand. So you should be
Cool.
able to unmute yourself and talk now, Cole.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Cole, how's it going? Thanks for
Good.
doing
How
this.
are you? Yeah.
Good. I wonder if you could, I'm talking because I didn't quite know how to explain. I wonder if you could go, there's a specific image that was like 2 or maybe 3 before the last iPhone shots of your van that was up there.
This van?
Yeah, so it's like 2 or 3 before. Yeah, this one right here. It really struck me, and I know that you had just alluded in talking to Dale about some of them feeling almost evening, even though they're shot in broad daylight. And I wonder if you could just talk about the conditions for shooting this one in particular. Like how much of this is true cloud cover versus Colombian, fun. Like
Yeah.
how did you create this?
So this one, the sun is dead center, so it's I believe the end of the day, sort of up at that helicopter pad spot. And is super underexposed, which is why we have like the sky and the northern, like the upper part of the picture. So you got like the two trees and the sun, and then like the sky above it's all like true just exposure. And then everything down below is basically like a solarization slash like chemical stain. Because I like pulled it out of one of the chemistries too soon and either exposed it to light or like let it languish too long. So like the trees maybe had, I don't know if they maybe had some information in them and then like got all weird like the clouds but different, or if I like just didn't wash it in the stop long enough. I'm not really sure what caused that like solarization around the trees, and it might not even be solarization, it could be other types of staining. So that one's kind of like chance. I might have, when I first made it, like been like, oh crap, I missed it, like I should have made that picture like 5 minutes ago. But then the chemicals sort of like did their thing. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just have one follow-up, which is, could you talk a little bit about composition in general in either these or like or frames that are a little more like a realistic picture of a setting? Do you focus a lot on like linearity, like how rocks are lining up with water, or is that less important to you than capturing some other naturalistic element?
Hmm. Well, with these pictures from the source project, it's pretty much like figure out like where you are in relation to the sun. I'm using this app to track where the sun will go and be, and then like trying to figure out like where it will be in the frame. So it's like more calculating where you are like in the environment, and then it's just like putting yourself behind stuff that's cool, whether it's like just straight up blue sky or like leaves or fog or anything. But for the landscape pictures, I'm mostly trying, I'm trying to limit the presence of the natural world, like a house or a smokestack, by through framing. But I'm also looking for this, like, I don't really want, like, it's like a very clean understanding of the landscape, like that almost presents it in a like it's from an epic or something. Like not necessarily like always thinking about symmetry, but like constantly thinking about like how the images are, like how it's going to read and how people are going to move through the space, like based on like where I put the focus, like because wet plate has like all this like creamy milky sky and highlights and stuff, but it also can be like really crisp and sharp, and so just trying to balance all of those things so that when you like see the good when you like see the picture itself, it just like reads as a place, I guess. I'm not really sure. It just like reads properly for me. I'm not sure if that's helpful for you, Cole, but
That's great. That's exactly it. Thank you so much, man.
yeah.
It's subjective, like you're kind of responding to the location that you find yourself in and kind of composing based on what you're presented with.
Yeah. Yeah. And like sometimes if I have a nice idea and it won't even be like, oh, I want to do a tree that's like falling into the ocean because that's like about the water coming in. It'll be like I want to have a tree that has like a glowing mark around it with like comets in the sky. Like it'll be all chemical based like aberrations that I want to turn the landscape into, that are sort of like driving where I point the camera and why. Um yeah.
Linda's wondering who or what influences your work.
Well, like my family and my sense of home. Like I grew up in New Hampshire, like where my family had a bunch of land, and we were sort of like always very present about like what was happening on that land. And as I've grown up, I moved to Maine and I started sea kayaking, and I like have moved to this island. And I really look at all of these places through the lens of like family or home or backyard or landscape that's like very much connected to like the person, like a personal narrative. so that's something that like very much inspires me, and like also includes like the natural habitat and just like spending time in nature. We do a lot of birding and just like looking at the landscape in a way that doesn't mean that you need to do anything, but just like hear or see something really quickly and then be like, yeah, cool. Like just pure joy of spending time outside. And I look at a lot of like 19th century photographers like Timothy O'Sullivan. And I look at Sally Mann's work when she has something new to look at. And, you know, like for everything that's fed to me through Instagram, I guess, you know, I don't spend a lot of time, spend most of my time looking at my history of photography books and like just daydreaming about what's going on, like with the places I care about, like in first person, I guess.
All right. Thanks, Cole. Thanks
Yeah.
everybody who's had questions and comments so far. And if you have a question that you haven't asked yet, feel free to put it in the chat. And then again, if you have just a message that you want to share with Cole, you can also put it in the chat and then I'll share the transcript. And if there are no other questions, all right, I think that might be it for questions.
Cool. Great.
Cool. Thank you, Cole, and thanks to everybody who came out tonight. And we haven't posted registration for the next talk, the August one yet, but we will be doing that shortly. And then September, we're going to have Christina Fontsari from Spain. So that's very exciting. And hopefully those will be up, both of them up for registration on the website, but just keep your eyes open. And hopefully we'll see you all again shortly.
Great. Thanks
All
again.
right. Thank you, Cole. Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Melanie has a comment. She likes the idea, the dichotomy of being present in your place while also being inside your head with the daydreaming.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. And thanks, Cole.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Night.
Bye.
Night.